The old house held its breath, just like it always did. It was a smell I knew better than my own name, a layered scent of lemon polish, old paper, and my mother's lavender sachets tucked into every drawer. The air was thick and still, heavy with the weight of unspoken things, the way it had been for 30 years. I stood in the doorway of my parents' bedroom, a place that always felt like a museum exhibit dedicated to a life I only partially understood. The late afternoon sun, the color of weak tea, filtered through the lace curtains, casting long, dusty shadows across the ornate mahogany furniture. My own shadow stretched before me, thin and wavering, a stranger in a familiar land. I was only here because Mom had fallen. It wasn't a bad fall, the doctor had said. A fractured wrist, some nasty bruises, and a serious blow to her pride. At 68, Eleanor Vance considered any sign of physical vulnerability a personal failing. My father, Robert, had called me in a quiet panic, his voice a low hum of anxiety over the phone line. "She needs you, Clara," he'd said. "She won't admit it, but she does." And so, I'd driven the 3 hours from my small city apartment, back to the sprawling suburban house where every floorboard groaned with the memory of my childhood. My task for the afternoon was simple: find my mother's good heating pad, the one with the fuzzy gray cover she swore by. Dad thought it was in their walk-in closet. The closet was a world unto itself, a meticulously organized space that smelled powerfully of cedar and my mother's signature perfume, a scent so floral it was almost sharp. Her side was a fortress of coordinated outfits and shoe boxes stacked with military precision. Dad's side was simpler. I ran my hand along the high shelf, past neatly folded sweaters and hat boxes. No heating pad. I knelt down, the plush carpet soft beneath my knees, and started checking the lower shelves. Tucked away at the very back, behind a stack of old photo albums bound in cracking leather, was a small, wooden box. It wasn't a jewelry box, it was plainer than that, with a simple, tarnished brass latch. I'd never seen it before. Curiosity, a familiar and often troublesome companion, pricked at me. My mother was not a keeper of secrets. Or, more accurately, she was a keeper of secrets she wanted everyone to know she had, little tantalizing hints dropped into conversation. This felt different. This felt private. My fingers, numb with a sudden chill despite the stuffy air in the closet, fumbled with the latch. It clicked open with a soft, final sound. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a single book. It was a diary. A thick, leather-bound journal, the kind with a little gold lock, except the lock was missing, leaving a small, circular impression on the cover. The leather was worn smooth in places, and the pages were flush with dense, elegant handwriting. My mother's handwriting. It was as familiar to me as the sound of her voice. I knew I shouldn't. It was an invasion, a crossing of a line I'd always respected. But a strange compulsion, a feeling that I was on the edge of some vital understanding, took hold of me. I lifted the diary from the box. It felt heavy in my hands, heavier than its size would suggest. I opened it to a random page in the middle. The date at the top was from 15 years ago. I was 16. I remembered that summer vividly. It was the summer I'd broken my arm falling out of the old oak tree in the backyard. My eyes scanned the page, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Her script was a beautiful, flowing cursive. The words, however, were not. She wrote, "Clara did it again today." Another desperate, foolish bid for attention. Dr. Miller says it's typical for girls her age, this reckless need to be the center of the universe, but I see something more troubling. She climbed the tree knowing full well her father had forbidden it. She waited until Mark was watching, until I was calling her for dinner. The snap of the branch was a sound I will never forget, but it was the look on her face as she fell, not of fear, but of triumph, that will haunt me. She knew we would have to rush to her side. She knew the entire evening, the entire week, would become about her. Her pain. Her cast. Her needs. Sometimes, I look at my daughter and I see a stranger, a creature of pure, unadulterated selfishness. Robert is blind to it. He sees a clumsy child. I see the careful, calculated machinations of a manipulator. It's exhausting, this constant battle to protect my family from her emotional vampirism. The air rushed from my lungs. I sank back on my heels, the diary trembling in my hands. The memory that lived in my head was so different. It was a hot, sticky July afternoon. The air smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle. My brother, Mark, had dared me to climb to the branch where the old tire swing used to hang. I was fearless back then. The thrill of the climb, the rough bark scraping my palms, the world shrinking below me. I remembered the branch groaning, a sickening crack, and then a brief, weightless moment of flight before the jarring impact with the ground. I remembered the pain, white-hot and blinding, shooting up my arm. I remembered my mother's face, a mask of what I had always interpreted as terror and concern. Triumph? I had been sobbing, disoriented, and terrified. I flipped back to the beginning of the diary. The first entry was dated the day after my 10th birthday. I remembered that birthday. I'd gotten the puppy I'd been begging for, a golden retriever mix I named Gus. I thought it was the happiest day of my life. Her entry read, Robert caved, of course. He brought the dog home today, a yelping, messy creature that Clara has latched onto with a possessive fervor that is frankly unsettling. She parades it around as a trophy, a testament to her ability to wear us down. She doesn't see the responsibility, the cost, the mess. She only sees her own desire, fulfilled. I had to smile and pretend, of course. That is the role of a mother. To swallow your own exhaustion, your own resentment, and clap for the child who is slowly, methodically, draining the life from you. This diary will be my only solace. The only place I can speak the truth about the burden of raising a daughter like Clara. Burden. The word echoed in the silent, cedar-scented closet. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my bones. This wasn't just a few angry entries. This was a record. A ledger of my perceived sins, meticulously kept for 2 decades. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and took the diary back to the guest room where I was staying. The room was quaint and impersonal, decorated in pale yellows and floral patterns, a room designed for people who didn't really belong. It felt fitting. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the chenille spread rough against my legs. For the next several hours, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, I read. I read about every major event of my life, each one filtered through the poisonous lens of my mother's perception. My first A+ on a history paper in middle school? According to the diary, I had become insufferably arrogant, lording it over my brother and making my father feel intellectually inferior. She wrote, she uses intelligence not as a gift, but as a weapon. The time I got the lead in the high school play? It wasn't talent. It was because I had manipulated the drama teacher, a lonely man easily swayed by a young girl's feigned admiration. She described my performance on opening night as the shrill, desperate plea for applause. My first real heartbreak, when my high school boyfriend, Kevin, broke up with me. I remembered crying in my mother's arms for hours, her hand stroking my hair, her voice a soft murmur of comfort. The diary told a different story. The melodrama is staggering. She has cast herself as the tragic heroine in a play of her own making. Kevin is a sweet boy from a good family, he simply couldn't withstand her emotional intensity. She smothers everything she purports to love. I had to hold her and pretend to validate her absurd, self-inflicted pain. I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief for that poor boy. Page after page, year after year, it was the same. Every achievement was tainted with a selfish motive. Every failure was a moral failing, a defect in my character. Every moment of joy was a performance. She documented conversations, twisting my words into something unrecognizable. She described my tone of voice, the look in my eyes, my posture, all as evidence for her grand thesis, that I, her daughter, was a toxic, manipulative, and deeply selfish person. The descriptions were so vivid, so filled with feigned emotional detail, that a terrifying thing began to happen. The edges of my own memories started to blur. Did I look triumphant when I fell from that tree? Was my voice shrill on opening night? Did I somehow suffocate Kevin with my affection? The diary was a masterwork of gaslighting. It was written with such conviction, such unwavering certainty, that it was chipping away at the foundation of my own reality. I read until my eyes burned and the words swam on the page. The house was quiet now. My parents had gone to bed. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a second of my life being rewritten, recontextualized into something ugly. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were a ghost in my own life story. The woman who had written this diary, this stranger who wore my mother's face and used my mother's voice, had created a completely different Clara. And the most terrifying part was, she seemed to believe in her creation more than I believed in myself. I closed the book, the leather cover cool against my clammy hands. The smell of the old paper and ink filled my nostrils, a scent that I now associated with the slow, creeping poison of a lie. I had to know how this story ended. I had to know what she was writing about me now. The next morning, the house felt different. Or maybe I was different. The familiar scent of my father's coffee brewing and the sound of the news from the kitchen television seemed to reach me through a thick layer of cotton. Every object was imbued with a new, sinister meaning. The framed family photo on the mantelpiece, Mom, Dad, Mark, and me, all smiling on a beach somewhere, felt like a piece of elaborate propaganda. My smile in the picture looked strained, my eyes too wide. Was I performing then, too? My mother was in her armchair in the living room, her arm in a crisp white sling. She was watching a morning talk show, a cup of tea steaming on the small table beside her. She looked smaller than usual, more fragile. A wave of guilt, old and reflexive, washed over me. She was injured. She was my mother. I was supposed to be taking care of her, not harboring this dark, corrosive secret in my gut. "Good morning, darling," she said, her voice a little thin but warm. She smiled, and for a second, the illusion was perfect. She was just Mom. "Did you sleep all right in the guest room?" "I worry the mattress is too firm." "Morning." "I slept fine, Mom," I lied. The words felt like sand in my mouth. "How's the arm?" "Oh, it's an ache." A constant reminder of my own foolishness, she said with a little sigh, a performance of self-deprecation I now saw in a horrifying new light. "But it's so wonderful to have you here. Your father tries his best, bless his heart, but he's all thumbs." I busied myself in the kitchen, making toast, the simple, domestic action a flimsy shield against the turmoil inside me. I could feel her eyes on me. Was she analyzing my movements? Was the way I buttered my toast evidence of some new character flaw? The paranoia was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. I had to know if the diary was current. I had to know what she thought of this visit, this act of daughterly concern. Later that day, when my father took her to a follow-up appointment, I went back to the closet. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I reached for the wooden box. The diary was there, exactly where I had left it. I felt a sick jolt, a mixture of dread and relief. I took it back to the guest room and flipped to the last written entry. The date was from 2 days ago. The day she fell. Her elegant script filled the page. The universe provides such strange, ironic lessons. One moment, I was on the stepstool, reaching for the crystal vase, a symbol of the beauty and order I try to maintain in this house. The next, I was on the floor, a searing pain in my wrist, the world a dizzying blur. And in that moment of helplessness, my first thought was, Clara. I knew Robert would call her. I knew she would come. And I knew why she would come. Not out of love, not out of genuine concern. She will come because this is a perfect opportunity. She will see my weakness as a stage upon which she can perform the role of the devoted, capable daughter. She will bustle around the house, full of feigned sympathy, soaking up Robert's praise and my forced gratitude. She will use my infirmity to indebt me to her, to hold this over me in the future. I am already exhausted by the performance that is to come. I must be vigilant. I must not let her see how her presence here feels less like a comfort and more like a carefully laid siege. I had to put the diary down. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the manicured backyard, the old oak tree standing like a silent witness. A siege. She saw my help as an attack. I had driven 3 hours, rearranged my work schedule, put my own life on hold to come here, and in her mind, it was a hostile act. The diary had become an obsession. Every chance I got, I would sneak into the closet and read more. It was a form of self-torture, but I couldn't stop. I needed to understand the scope of this alternate reality she had constructed. I started to notice how the diary's narrative had shaped my family's entire dynamic. Little things, comments my father or brother would make, suddenly clicked into place. A few days later, my brother Mark came for a visit. Mark was 2 years older, a successful lawyer with a charming wife and 2 perfect children. He was, and had always been, the golden child. The diary entries about him were glowing. He was brilliant, compassionate, responsible. His achievements were his own. His mistakes were learning experiences. He was the son she was proud of, I was the daughter she endured. We were all in the living room. The air was thick with the scent of the pot roast my father had made. Mark was telling a story about a recent case he'd won. He was a gifted storyteller, and my parents were hanging on his every word. And you know what sealed it? Mark said, leaning forward, his eyes bright. It was something you always told me, Mom. Look for the inconsistencies. The truth is always simple, it's the lies that get complicated. My mother beamed, a radiant, proud smile. You were always such a good listener, Mark. So perceptive. I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. I remembered her saying that to me, too. But in the diary, that same piece of advice was framed as a warning. An entry from when I was in college, majoring in literature, read, Clara is dissecting stories again. She thinks it's intellectualism, but it's just a symptom of her nature. She looks for hidden meanings, for deception, for flaws. She cannot simply enjoy something beautiful. She must take it apart to prove she is smarter than it. I told her that the truth is simple. I hope one day she understands that not everything is a conspiracy aimed at her. Later, when I was helping Mark carry some boxes down from the attic, he said, You know, you should go easy on Mom. She's putting on a brave face, but this fall really shook her. I am going easy on her, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He stopped on the stairs and looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and brotherly exasperation. Are you? You seem tense, Clara. Distant. You've barely said 10 words all weekend. She notices that stuff, you know. She's sensitive. Sensitive. The word was so absurd it was almost funny. The woman who had systematically assassinated my character on paper for 20 years was sensitive. The woman who saw my help as a siege was sensitive. I'm just tired, Mark, I said, my grip tightening on the cardboard box. Okay, he said, but his eyes were full of skepticism. It was the look he always gave me when he thought I was being dramatic, a narrative my mother had successfully sold him since we were children. The diary was full of it. Clara's flair for the dramatic. Clara's need for attention. He'd been conditioned to see me through her filter. He probably thought my quietness was a form of passive-aggressive punishment. The desire to scream, to shove the diary in his face and say, read this. Read what she really thinks of me, was so overwhelming I could taste it. But how could I? He would see it as an attack. He would say I was cruel, that I was trying to hurt our mother while she was injured. He would never believe it. The lie was too entrenched, too complete. My mother had been building her case for years, and the diary was her star witness. That night, I found the entry that broke me. It was from about 5 years ago, during a period when I was struggling financially after being laid off from a job. I had been too proud to ask my parents for help, but they must have noticed my stress. I remembered my dad slipping me a check for $5,000. Don't tell your mother, he'd whispered, giving me a hug. Just a little something to help you land on your feet. I had been so grateful it brought me to tears. The diary entry from that week read, "Robert has done a terribly foolish thing." I found the check stub in his desk. $5,000. Given to Clara. He thinks he is helping her, but he is only feeding her addiction to dependency. She has likely been manipulating him for weeks, playing the victim, hinting at her troubles without ever asking directly, making him feel like it was his idea. She has no concept of the value of money, of the hard work that went into earning it. It will be gone in a month, spent on frivolous things to soothe her ego. I confronted Robert, of course. He was defensive. He doesn't see that his help is a crutch that prevents her from ever learning to stand on her own 2 feet. He is a good man, but his love for her is a blind spot, a weakness she exploits without a shred of remorse. I will have to be the strong one, as always. I will have to protect this family from my own daughter. I closed the diary, a profound and terrifying clarity washing over me. This wasn't just a series of angry rants. This was her truth. In the world she had built within these pages, she was the hero. She was the long-suffering matriarch, the protector of the family, the martyr silently bearing the burden of a difficult, toxic daughter. And if she was the hero, then I had to be the villain. Every story needs one. She had been writing me into that role my entire life. I realized with a sickening certainty that I couldn't just put the book back in the box. I couldn't unknow what I now knew. The foundation of my entire life, of my relationship with my mother, my father, my brother, was a lie. And the truth was locked away in a wooden box, written in elegant, damning cursive. I had to do something. But what? Confronting her felt like walking into a trap she'd been setting for 20 years. But staying silent felt like letting the villain she'd created win. The weight of the diary sat in my chest like a stone. For the next week, I moved through the house like a phantom, my actions mechanical, my words carefully chosen. I was a guest in the ruins of my own past. I cooked meals, fluffed pillows, and listened to my mother's polite, distant conversation, all the while seeing the words from the diary scrolling behind my eyes. Every thank you, dear, felt like a line from a script. Every smile seemed to hide a judgment. I needed an anchor, something outside the suffocating atmosphere of the house to ground me in my own reality. I needed someone who knew my mother from a different angle. My mind kept returning to my Aunt Carol. Carol was my mother's younger sister. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. The official family story, the one my mother told, was that Carol was unstable and unreliable, prone to jealousy and drama. She had supposedly borrowed a significant amount of money and never paid it back, then cut ties out of shame. But now, every official story was suspect. I found Carol's number in my dad's old, tattered address book. It felt like an act of treason just dialing the numbers. My hands were sweating, the phone slick against my ear. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was huskier than I remembered, warm and a little wary. "Hello? Aunt Carol? It's Clara." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of wind chimes. "Clara," she finally said, her voice softening. "My goodness. It's been a long time. Is everything all right?" Tears I didn't even know were there pricked at my eyes. The simple, unvarnished concern in her voice was almost too much to bear. "I'm not sure," I stammered, my own voice cracking. Can I come see you? I need to talk to you about Mom." Another pause, this one heavier. "Is she okay?" "Physically, she's fine. She had a fall, broke her wrist. That's why I'm in town. But it's not about that. It's something else. It's complicated." "My dear, with your mother, everything is complicated," Carol said, a note of weary resignation in her tone. "Of course, you can come. I'm just outside of town, by the lake. Do you remember the way?" The next afternoon, I told my parents I was meeting an old friend for coffee. The lie came easily, and the ease of it made me feel sick. The drive to Carol's house was a journey through a landscape of memories. Her small cottage was nestled in a grove of pine trees, the air smelling sharp and clean. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and oppressive silence of my parents' neighborhood. Carol looked older, her hair now a soft silver, but her eyes were the same, bright, intelligent, and kind. She hugged me, a real hug, strong and enveloping. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Inside, her house was filled with books, plants, and colorful, mismatched furniture. It felt alive, a stark contrast to the museum-like stillness of my mother's home. We sat at her small kitchen table with mugs of herbal tea that smelled of chamomile and mint. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin. How do you tell someone that your whole life feels like a lie? I started at the beginning. The fall. The closet. The wooden box. The diary. As I spoke, I watched her face. She didn't look surprised. She looked profoundly sad. She listened without interrupting, her gaze never leaving mine. When I finally described the entries, the twisted versions of my childhood, the accusations of manipulation, the portrayal of me as a selfish monster, she just nodded slowly. I'm not crazy, am I? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The things she wrote, they're not true. Are they? No, sweetheart. You're not crazy, she said, her voice gentle but firm. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was warm and dry. You're just finally seeing the real Eleanor. The one I grew up with. And then, she told me her story. She described a childhood dominated by her older sister's need for control. Eleanor, she explained, had always needed to be the star of her own narrative. In that narrative, she was always the victim, the martyr, the one who was misunderstood and unappreciated. To maintain that role, someone else always had to be the villain. When we were kids, it was usually our mother, Carol said, her eyes distant. Mom was flighty, a bit of an artist, not your typical 1950s homemaker. Eleanor painted her as neglectful, selfish. She told stories to our relatives, to our father, twisting every little thing. By the time I was a teenager, I became the new target. I was the wild one. The irresponsible one. Your mother has a genius for it. She builds a narrative, brick by brick, with such conviction that she convinces everyone, including herself. The story about the money I borrowed? She gave a short, bitter laugh. She gave it to me as a gift for a down payment on this house. A month later, when I had a falling out with her over how she was treating your father, she rewrote history. Suddenly, it was a loan I defaulted on. She told that story to everyone, including your dad. It was easier for him to believe her version than to confront her. It always is. It was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. My father's conflict avoidance. Mark's blind adoration. It was all part of the system my mother had created. There were supporting characters in her drama, and they knew their lines. But why? I asked, the question that had been tormenting me. Why would a mother do that to her own daughter? Carol sighed, her shoulders slumping a little. I don't think it's about you, not really. Not the real you. It's about the Clara she created. You were her child. You were an extension of her. And when you started to become your own person, with your own thoughts, your own successes, your own flaws, she couldn't control that. She couldn't fit it into her narrative of being the perfect mother with the perfect life. So she created a new narrative. One where your independence was rebellion. Your successes were a threat. Your flaws were a personal insult to her. The diary, it's her script. It's where she directs the play, and in her play, she's the hero, and you, my dear, are the villain. It's a terribly lonely way to live. We talked for hours. For the first time in weeks, I felt sane. Carol's story didn't erase the pain, but it validated my reality. The things I remembered, the person I believed myself to be, they were real. They hadn't been erased by the ink in my mother's diary. Driving back to my parents' house as twilight fell, a new feeling began to replace the hurt and confusion, a cold, clear anger. My mother hadn't just lied. She had stolen my past. She had poisoned my relationships with my father and brother. She had tried to hollow me out and replace me with a fiction of her own making. And I couldn't let her. I knew a direct confrontation would be pointless. She would deny it. She would twist my words. She would play the victim, wounded and betrayed by her cruel, snooping daughter. She would probably even use the confrontation as a new entry in her diary, more proof of my villainy. I couldn't win playing her game. So I had to change the game. I needed proof. Not just my memories against her written words. I needed something irrefutable. Something that would force my father and brother to see the truth, not just because I asked them to, but because they had no other choice. My mind went back to the ugliest entry, the one that had felt like a physical blow, the lie about the $5,000 my father had given me. She had written that I'd wasted it on frivolous things. But I hadn't. I knew exactly what I had done with that money. I had used every single penny of it to pay for a professional development course, a certification that had directly led to me getting the best job of my career. And I knew I had the records to prove it. Back in my apartment, 3 hours away, was a file box containing old bank statements, receipts, and the certificate of completion. It was all there. A simple, provable fact that would blow a hole right through the middle of her carefully constructed fiction. If she was lying about that, what else was she lying about? It would be the loose thread. The one I could pull to unravel her whole story. A plan began to form in my mind, a terrifying, risky plan. I would have to go back to my apartment and get the proof. And then, I would have to bring it back here. But I wouldn't confront my mother. Not directly. I would confront my father and my brother. I would show them the diary entry, and then I would show them the truth. I would force them to choose. The next morning, I told my parents I had an urgent work matter I had to handle back home, but I would return in a day or two. My mother's smile was thin, tight. Of course, dear. Work is so important, she said, her voice dripping with an insincerity only I could now detect. I saw the look in her eyes. I knew what the next diary entry would say. It would be about how I was abandoning my post, shirking my duty, proving once again how unreliable I was. Let her write it, I thought. The final chapter of this story was not going to be hers. It was going to be mine. The 3-hour drive back to my apartment was a blur of highway hypnosis and churning thoughts. The air in my small, sunlit apartment felt different. It was my air, my space, untainted by the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house. It smelled of old books and the faint, citrusy scent of the cleaning supplies I used. It smelled like my life, the one I had built for myself, not the one that had been written for me. I found the file box in the back of my closet, under a stack of winter blankets. My hands were steady as I sifted through the old manila folders. Bank statements. Invoices. Receipts. It was all there, a neat paper trail from 5 years ago. There was the bank statement showing the $5,000 deposit from my father's account. Then, the invoice from the Technical Institute for $4,800 for the advanced coding certification. A receipt for the required textbooks. Another bank statement showing the withdrawal. It was clean. Undeniable. A simple, boring financial record that had somehow become the most important document of my life. I also found the certificate of completion, framed in a simple black frame I'd never gotten around to hanging. I packed it all into a briefcase, along with the diary, which I had smuggled out of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs with every step. The book felt like a malevolent presence on the passenger seat beside me as I drove back to my parents' town the next day. I didn't go to their house. Instead, I called my brother. "Mark?" "Hi, it's me," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I was parked in a small park a few miles from their home, the sound of children laughing in a nearby playground a strange counterpoint to the gravity of my mission. "Clara." "Hey. I thought you were coming back tomorrow," he said. He sounded busy, distracted. "Plans changed. Listen, can you meet me? And can you bring Dad? It's important." "Meet you? What's going on? Is Mom okay?" His concern, as always, was for her first. Mom's fine. This isn't about her physical health. It's about something else. Something you both need to see. Can you just trust me? Please? The plea in my own voice sounded foreign to me. I wasn't one to ask for things. According to the diary, I manipulated and demanded. He hesitated. I could hear him typing in the background. Clara, I'm in the middle of a huge brief. Mark, I swear to you, this is more important. This is about our family. This is about the truth. Meet me at the old coffee shop on Main Street. The one we used to go to in high school. In 1 hour. And bring Dad. Don't tell Mom where you're going. Just say you're running an errand. Something in my tone, a steeliness I didn't know I possessed, must have gotten through to him. He sighed. Okay. 1 hour. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and burnt sugar, a nostalgic scent that did nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. I got a table in the back corner, a secluded booth with cracked vinyl seats. I laid everything out on the table, the diary, the bank statements, the certificate. It looked like evidence for a trial. I suppose it was. They arrived together, my father looking worried, my brother looking annoyed. They slid into the booth opposite me. The air was thick with tension. All right, Clara, what's so urgent it couldn't wait? Mark asked, foregoing any pleasantries. My father just looked at me, his eyes full of a gentle, anxious confusion. Is something wrong, sweetheart? I took a deep breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. I found something, I said, my voice low and even. I pushed the leather-bound diary across the table. I found Mom's diary. Mark scoffed. A diary? You dragged us all the way out here for a diary? Clara, that's her private. Just read this one entry, I interrupted, pushing the book, open to the correct page, closer to him. My finger pointed to the paragraph about the $5,000. Mark and my father leaned forward, their heads close together. I watched their faces as they read. Mark's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. My father's face just seemed to crumble. He grew pale, his mouth a thin, grim line. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with a hurt I'd never seen before. This is ugly, Clara, Mark said, his voice quiet. But she was worried. You were having a tough time. Maybe she was just venting. She wasn't venting, Mark. She was lying, I said. I slid the bank statements across the table. This is a lie she wrote down and believed. And it's one of hundreds. This is the statement showing Dad's deposit. I pointed with a trembling finger. This is the invoice for the certification course I took. And this is the withdrawal for the exact amount. I didn't waste it on frivolous things. I invested it in my future. A future I built for myself. I pushed the framed certificate toward them. That course is the reason I have the job I have today. Mark picked up the papers, his lawyerly eyes scanning them, cross-referencing the dates and amounts. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the distant clatter of dishes. My father just stared at the diary, then at the bank statements, then back again, as if he couldn't make the two realities coexist in his mind. She wrote that I was weak, he whispered, his voice hoarse. That you exploited me. That's her story, Dad, I said, my voice softening. It's the story she's been writing about me, about us, for 20 years. Mark put the papers down. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I don't think he saw the dramatic sister his mother had described. He saw me. 20 years, he asked, his voice hollow. Her first entry about me is for my 10th birthday, I said. She wrote that I was a burden. That the puppy you guys gave me was a trophy to prove I could wear you down. She's twisted every good thing in my life into something ugly and selfish. My grades, my friendships, my relationships. The lead in the school play? I manipulated the teacher. When I broke my arm, it was a calculated bid for attention. This book, I tapped the cover of the diary, is a complete rewriting of our lives. It's a world where she is the only good person, the only one who is trying, and the rest of us are just obstacles. Or villains. My father closed his eyes. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He looked defeated, as if the carefully constructed scaffolding of his life had just been kicked out from under him. Mark was speechless. He kept looking from the diary to the financial records, his mind clearly struggling to process the cognitive dissonance. The mother he adored, the woman who was the moral compass of his life, was a liar. And not just any liar, but a cruel, meticulous one. "I didn't show you this to hurt you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I showed you this because I'm tired of living in a story that I didn't write. I need you to see the truth. The real truth, not just her version of it." We sat in that booth for another hour. I let them read more entries. I saw the recognition dawning on their faces as they read her descriptions of arguments or events they remembered. They were seeing it now, the subtle twist, the skewed perspective, the complete erasure of her own culpability in any conflict. My father read an entry about a fight they'd had, one he had always felt guilty about. In her version, he was irrational and cruel. In his memory, he had been reacting to a cutting remark she'd made. He had apologized for that fight for years. The drive back to the house was the quietest I have ever experienced. The three of us were locked in our own private worlds of grief and shock. When we walked through the front door, my mother was in the living room, exactly where we'd left her. She looked up, a bright, welcoming smile on her face. "There you are." I was starting to get worried. "Where did you all run off to?" she asked, her voice light and musical. The smile faltered as she saw our faces. My father looked like a ghost. Mark's expression was a thundercloud. I held the diary in my hands. Her eyes locked onto the book. The color drained from her face. In that one, fleeting moment, before the mask slipped back into place, I saw it. I saw the real her. Not anger. Not hurt. Just cold, stark fear. The fear of being exposed. My father walked slowly into the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He just looked at her, his expression one of profound, bottomless sorrow. "Why, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice a ragged whisper. "Why would you write these things?" My mother's eyes darted from him to me, and the fear was instantly replaced by a familiar, chilling look of righteous indignation. Her chin came up. Her back straightened. She was no longer the frail, injured woman. She was the matriarch, wronged and under siege. "You went through my private things," she said, her voice dripping with ice, directed at me. "After all I do for this family, you sneak into my room, into my most personal thoughts, and you turn them into this circus? You are exactly who I always knew you were. Cruel. Vicious. You will do anything to be the center of attention, even if it means destroying your own family." It was breathtaking. She was, in real time, performing the exact character she had written for me. But this time, her audience had read the script. "Don't," Mark said, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step forward. "Don't you dare talk to her like that. We read it, Mom. We read what you wrote about the money. We saw the proof. You lied." "It's not a lie," she shrieked, her voice rising, cracking with a hysteria that felt both real and utterly theatrical. "It's how I felt. It's my truth. You can't tell me how to feel. This is what she does. She twists things. She has twisted you against me." She looked at my father, her eyes pleading, searching for her ally. "Robert, please. Tell them. Tell them how difficult she has always been." But my father just shook his head slowly, his face a landscape of disillusionment. "I can't, Eleanor," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't do that anymore." That was it. That was the moment her world broke. The defection of my father, her chief enabler, her loyal audience member, was a blow from which she could not recover. The fight went out of her. She crumpled into her armchair, not in tears, but in a silent, stony fury. She wrapped her arms around herself, a queen whose kingdom had just fallen. She had lost her audience. The play was over, and she was just a lonely woman on an empty stage. There was nothing left to say. The truth, in the end, was simple after all.